Right, I think I'm live. I'm seeing it here, but I'm not 100% sure. So if something happens, I will upload the recording, and I can see that it's telling me something here is okay. Never mind. Um, this okay. So it's okay. Apparently, it's not streaming on one of the platforms, but it's okay. Let's just get started here with this cute little piping plover. And I've already sketched my little bird. And this is 140 pounds cold press arch watercolor paper. And I used masking fluid to mask around the bird. So when we paint the water and the sand around, I don't have to worry about getting any of that paint on the body of the bird. And that's because the bird has lots of white, especially here on the bottom. So I wanted to keep it nice and clean. Now the palette for this little bird is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Limited. So I'm only using yellow ochre, burnt sienna. I'm going to get any paint there because I masked it. So I'm going to use gravity to my advantage and let some of that water flow downward here. And I'm going to check to make sure that I don't have any pockets of paint, of paper that is not wet. And if I have any excess water, I can just dry my brush really well and then soak up. All right. So everything is wet and the paper is shiny, but you see I don't have any puddles of water. It's nice and flat. And that brush is a little bit too big. So I'm gonna get a smaller brush and load it with my very diluted ultramarine with a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm just going to add a little bit of the paint and kind of let it flow. You see in the sample, the sky made is like super, super light. And we already blended the color really light, but it's even further blending with more water here, the water on the paper, so it's extra, extra light. I'm not, I don't want to cover every single bit. You're going to see the layers underneath. So that's the reason why I didn't want any of the colors that we're going to use for the sand and the water to get into the body of the bird, so it doesn't get to see through to that layer. All right, so I'm just going to remove the excess because I do have a little bit of excess water on the sides of the tape. And I didn't go all the way down because I can have a little bit of dry brushing on the bottom. And again, I'm going to use gravity to spread that water evenly. I'm just taking a look. You see the camera is picking up really nicely. That I don't have any pockets. That doesn't have any paint. All right, so let's go back to our ultramarine. Now for the water here, I do want it to be slightly darker than the sky, so I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to the mix. And I'm going to start right at the horizon line. Sand and the water, and I'm just going to add some shadows, of course, where the bird is his legs here, it would be casting a shadow, so those would be darker. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of the raw umber into that yellow ochre mix. And I'm also going to mix a little bit of Payne's Gray. I think I actually might just add a little bit of the Payne's Gray to this ultramarine mix, just to desaturate it even more. Shadows are, usually desaturated, so they're not bright, and that's what the Payne's Gray is doing here. So let me test it first. It's a little bit, it's almost the same value, right? So I'm going to add a little bit more of the Payne's Gray. All right, let's see now. I think that works. Yeah, let's see how our raw umber with yellow ochre mixture is. I think it could be a little bit darker, right? So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow ochre, just a little bit here and there. And here I'm going to put a little bit of a lighter blue, so I'm just going to come with a little bit, oh, way too light, but it's okay. I'm just going to quickly quickly rinse the brush out and bring some water here. And I think that's good. Let me see if I can make like the shadows directly under the bird a little bit darker. So let me get some of the raw umber mix. And if need be, I can actually, everything is way too wet here, so I'm just going to dry a little bit so I can place some darker values right under the, and before I do that, actually, I want to take a little bit of more on the yellow ochre side, and maybe I'll make this here just some harder edges here, and also a little bit darker, just so we can have a little bit more definition. Just a little bit. Alright, and before I remove the masking fluid and continue with the bird, I just want to check and see if there are any questions. So give me 1 second. While I switch. And I don't think there are any questions, but it was good to see how the camera is so perfect. All right, so I'm going back to the main camera here, and I'm ready to remove the masking fluid. Now you don't need anything special to remove the masking fluid. You can just rub it off, but I do have lotion in my hands, so I'm going to use a masking fluid pickup, and it's just this, hard latex, which that's what the masking fluid is liquid. Oops. And with this, I have a little bit here. Just want to make sure I have some on the side of my palette here that it was dried, and I'm just mixing with a little bit of water just to lift the pigment. And I want very little water. Now I'm going to switch to a really small brush. I'm going to use I have a tiny little spotter here, so I have more control of the paint. Making sure that I don't have any beads of water on the ferrule. So I'm going to paint the eye. And I do want to make sure that I leave that little catch light without any paint. But you know, if you accidentally get paint on the, all right, it's looking funny now because we only have this part painted, but once we put the burnt sienna there, will work. All right, so continuing with this tiny brush. No, I don't think we need this. No, yeah, maybe we do. Sorry, just like, you know, I'm thinking out loud. I will mix a little bit of burnt sienna, but I never mix my colors with my good brushes. I have an old one. So I never get rid of my brushes. I just kind of like demold them so they do these kinds of jobs. So I have an old beat up brush here, and that's how I'm gonna mix my burnt sienna. And I'm just gonna mix it with a little bit of water. I don't want it to be too light. So not a whole lot of water. So I'm gonna see if this mixture is good. If not, I can just add a little bit more pigment, or if it's too dark, I can quickly blot it and add it again with being. Then I'll just drag this with a little bit more water. And it will be the value that I need. And one thing that you always want to make sure when you buy your brushes to paint with watercolors, you want to get first of all, you need to make sure that you get watercolor brushes that are specific for watercolor, because they work differently than acrylic and oil brushes. But you want to make sure you get a good quality brush that has a nice sharp point, because that's very important on your watercolor brushes. It doesn't have to be the most expensive one. Now, if you do decide that you want Kolinsky, those are much more expensive. I haven't bought a Kolinsky in like, I don't know, maybe 20 years, but I do have those that I bought 20 years ago, and I take very good care of them, so they're still good as new. And this one here, I like Escoda brushes. Yeah, that's good. Do even a little bit more. Alright, so now I'm going to go up a size. And we're just going to start with a flat wash on the wings. And it's really light. I'm just putting a flat wash. I'm going to do the same thing here. There is this spot, and I'm going to go right over the dark spot where we're going to put the Payne's gray there. And just add this under the chin here, because that would also be casting a shadow. And then towards the belly. And I see also a tiny little bit right here, but very little. I'm going to actually apply a teeny tiny little bit of pigment and then dilute it further. A little bit outside the lines here, but no matter. All right, so now we got to the point where there's really nothing we can do on the body until it dries. So I'm just gonna hit it with the blow dryer. Right, so it's all dried and we can start working on the shading on the wings and the head, and then do this dark band of Payne's gray here. So I think I'm actually going to start with that very dark that fade in towards the lighter area, and also with this more diluted Payne's gray can come here and create this shadow that goes around the mask, around the eye. Like so. I'm also going to darken it here. Because I don't want that lines like that, I'm just going to rinse the brush out, and with a little bit of water, I'm just going to run the tip while that is still wet. So I soften that, and it doesn't look like just a line. So I'm going to soften it even a little bit more, just a little bit more water, so it can fade into the white. Just softening here as well. Okay, and here's just to make them a little stand out a little bit more. There we go. I might even come with a little bit of shading here. I'm going to dilute that a little bit in a moment, but I'm just adding a little bit, just so the head has a little bit of more dimension. I'm going to take a little bit of that as well. I'm going to put it underneath here to show that umber. Lots and lots of water. Okay, now I'm gonna make the wings under just a little bit darker. Make the wings under just a little bit darker, but I need to let that dry. So let's work on the legs and put the shading on the legs. So for that, I'm going to take the burnt sienna, not the one that we mixed with a little bit of, let me not use this brush. the one that we put on the leg with a little bit of yellow ochre, just the burnt sienna. And I'm gonna add a little bit, just a tiny little bit of the ultramarine. So there is a little bit more ultramarine just to make a little bit darker, that brown. And I do want to put this here that shows that separation, right? In that, like the upper leg and the lower leg, maybe a little bit more shading here. And just like an indication of the textures that are on the feather, like the scaly textures. I think that's good. Not going to do anything else here. Don't want to get too carried away, she says as she continues working. That's good. All right, so now this should be dry enough that we can come back and add some more of the raw umber. Oops. Going to add just a tad of the Payne's Gray to that raw umber. Still with quite a bit of water because everything is kind of very light there. I just want it to be slightly darker than what we have on top. On the belly and then on the rump, just to, let's see, to very, very light. Nope, more water. Okay, yeah, just like this. And just making that, just a slightly thicker line there just to give more shading. Maybe I'll bring it over, make this here a little bit darker on the chin, and calling it down. All right, so